Welcome to this Board of Education workshop on the FY-2024 capital budget and capital improvement program. This is an opportunity for board members to hear from staff, ask questions, and get a little more information as we move through this portion of our budget work. So with that, Dr. Bedell, I would happy to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon or good evening to everybody who's logging in and attending. Thank you all for being here today. This is our Board of Education workshop on the Superintendent's recommended FY-2024 capital budget and capital improvement program. It is important to note that what we are going to discuss today really is state focused from a state funding standpoint, and not more around the localized funding aspect of capital projects. And it is also my understanding, based on my briefing, that that this agenda, the items that are going to be presented to you today are items that the board already has some familiarity with. It is continuing to follow through on the plan that has been discussed over the last several years, if I'm not mistaken. And so at this time, we want to bring it over to our staff. I'll have Alex and his staff to take us through this presentation.
Sure. Good evening. For the record, Alex Shaknovich, Chief Operating Officer.
And Kyle Roof, Supervisor, Planning, Design, and Construction.
And as Dr. Bedell indicated, the primary focus today, as will be explained by the next slide, is really to focus on the CIP submission as it relates to remitting it for state funding consideration. And the calendar will show that things that are of a local matter are going to be covered later in the process. So the annual process does begin in July when the state releases its essentially guidelines for crafting the capital improvement program. In August, the superintendent recommends the reviews and recommends the capital improvement program that's going to be brought forward. We're here now in September. The capital budget for, again, remittance to the state budget purposes has been presented. There will be this is the workshop. There will be a public hearing at this upcoming Wednesday's budget meeting, as well as the vote in September. The purpose is, again, as I said, for state remittance in this year by October the 4th, we have to submit the capital improvement program to the state for their funding consideration, and the Interagency Commission on School Construction staff will review that and provide some preliminary comments or observations to us. In November, we will provide them any additional backup or feedback that they require, as well as a letter of support from the county government indicating that they are, again, supportive and positioned or willing to come up with the matching funds required to leverage the state dollars. And again, that occurs in November. We will also in November get the first preliminary round of recommendations from the state. Remember, the state's budget cycle really kicks off in that sort of December to April timeline when the General Assembly concludes. Your operating and capital budget timeline really begins in December and doesn't really conclude until January of the year. So continuing around in December, we'll get some additional staff comments, but really it's not until February after the governor's released his budget recommendation that we really begin to flush out what the state will and will not support. That's finalized in April, and when the General Assembly concludes, and again in June, we'll find that out. For projects that are locally funded that are not eligible for state funding, again, the superintendent will recommend his combined operating and capital budgets in the month of December. This board will hold workshops and public hearings in the month of January and February, and no later than the end of February, the capital budget for local consideration has to be remitted to the county, and that will be the opportune time to put any amendments or any considerations for the county. The whole process then does conclude in June, where the state and county funding tracks join once again to begin our appropriation cycle and allow us to begin design and construction in July. In terms of the process, there's really 3 steps to it. The very first process is a feasibility study. That's 100% local funded and essentially provides a local validation or a business case for the project and no state funding. Similarly, local planning then is to repeat that exercise with slightly more information for the benefit of the state. Again, they do not participate in the funding for that, but it determines whether a project does or doesn't meet their criteria and make it eligible for funding. Past there, those projects really fall into 2 camps from the state's perspective. So from the state's perspective, they look at projects that are major, which is ground up construction, total reconstruction, or large additions. They have a formulaic approach to calculating those. While we are eligible for up to 50% of funding in Anne Arundel County, remember that because of the inverse proportionality of local wealth, right, to relative to our peers across the state, we are on the lowest. In fact, we are tied for the lowest amount of funding permissible from the state of Maryland for our school construction projects. And in fact, we only average about 25% of our public school construction funds are covered by the state. There are some of our peers that it's north of 90% that they can get state support for our projects. Systemic projects are a little bit better in that they are component replacements. You're replacing just the roof, just the boiler, just the cooling tower. And because they're very discrete and finite in nature, there are far less ineligible things that the state could find to essentially kick out of the funding algorithm. And therefore, our yield on those projects tends to increase. And as you can see, upwards of almost 50%. The next 2 slides are a little bit busy, and we'll just tell the tale of the slides, not the details in it. But essentially, you'll see that over time, we have incrementally been increasing in terms of the amount of state support that we've been getting, which is a good thing. We are about 10% of the real estate in the county. So one would expect that we should get about 10% of the state's amount of dollars that they leverage towards public school construction. And you'll see we've been hovering around that or slightly above, slightly below in recent times. So we hope that that continues to go forward. The next slide really talks about what I just said. Because we are perceived, and the numbers hold true, as one of the more affluent counties, we're expected to essentially fund our own requirements to a far greater extent than some of our other peers. And this is what the slide shows. So the blue bar or the blue line across the top is the percentage of our capital improvement project year over year that's funded by the county government, the red line at the bottom or the purple line at the bottom, really is how much we get from the state for that. And again, this is unique to Anne Arundel County. If we were in Somerset or Baltimore City, it would almost be flipped, right? But this is the story of Anne Arundel County that we've all come to love. If you don't pay attention to anything Alcé said tonight, please pay attention to this slide. Please, this is important. This slide. If you look at the bottom from left to right, you will see that we have the 5th oldest inventory in the entire state of Maryland. What that means is while our buildings are in great shape, they're getting up in years. Now, if you look directly north of our bar, look at Anne Arundel County at the top, the way this graph is oriented, if the top of those bars is growing to the right, that means their building fleet or the building fleet is getting older yet. We have leveled off. You see how our bar is flat at the top? That means through recent times, we have now finally come around to making those investments. We are no longer sort of sliding in the wrong direction. We sort of stabilize the patient, but that needs to continue. And in fact, what you really want to see is you want to see the slope go the other way, which means that we are now finally being able to gain ground. So a little bit of good news, a little bad news. Again, we're starting as the 5th oldest. We sort of stabilized the patient. We've invested a lot of money into our facilities as of late. We are not getting older-ish, right, comparative speaking, but this is not the time to relax because we are not very far away from sort of continuing to trend towards harm's way. I would hope that folks on our board will use that as a talking point when they are out and about in their circle of influences. CIP has a lot of variabilities in it, and we know these are not really foreign to us, right? The overall funding year over year does tend to have some highs and some lows or some technicalities to it. We also know that there are a lot of regulatory and environmental compliance matters that continue to pass and continue to drive up the cost of our projects and in some cases slow down the availability of project sites and project construction types. As always, and even more so now than in other years, we really are in a competition for human capital. So looking for qualified contractors, subcontractors, suppliers, and certainly the wage pressures are putting an upward pressure on the total cost of our projects. And you'll see at the bottom then, these are the state's figures, not ours, of what they, for FY-23, the year we're currently in, about $426 a square foot construction cost. And in the year ahead, they're projecting that to go up yet again to $458, again, largely because of labor cost increases and supply material cost increases. Our capital budget is really put into 2 bins. And Dr. Bedell put it far more eloquently than I will. There are no surprises here, right? There's no surprises. It's an exact same order. We've seen this now for a couple years. We all committed to this sort of multi-year plan. So as projects are bought and paid for, they're coming on the list, and the next cohort is coming on exactly as we predicted, with no new introductions, nothing's changing sequence. So in the major capital projects, and Mr. Roof will go through these, we have about $136.5 million of our ask is towards those large projects. Again, replacements, renovations, ground up constructions, et cetera. And about $62 million of our request is to smaller scale projects or components. So those 2 numbers added together is how we get to our $198.5 million. So as we drill down to some of the specifics, I'll turn it over to Mr. Roof to go through some of the line items.
Sure. As a reminder, the blue bar at the top indicates our funding level, and that's broken down into county and state funding sources. The first program that we're going to talk about is the additions. Our $4 million request is for Park Elementary School. As a reminder, the schematic designs were approved for that project on September 7th. And the request for funding of this program is through local funding sources. We anticipate requesting state funds next fiscal year for that project. West County Elementary School in response to the rapid growth in the western area of the county. This new 598-seat prototype elementary school is under construction right now. Our request is for $12.6 million in local funds, and it represents the final funding request for this project. As a reminder, the property for this is located off Conway Road, and it will be completed in the 24-25 school year. Old Mill South is under construction at Southgate Park. The school is designed for 1199 capacity, and it's a prototype design for all future middle schools in the county. Our request is for $37.3 million, and it's split between local and state funding sources. This project will utilize state funds provided through the Built to Learn program, and that is administered through the Maryland Stadium Authority. We anticipate the school to open again in the 24-25 school year. Cat North, ed specs for this project were approved in April of '22, and the schematic design is anticipated to be brought before all of you at the end of the '22 calendar year. The Career Center will be located on the Old Mill Complex property on Patriots Lane near the existing high school. Our request is for $58.4 million, and that is also split between state and local funds. The project is anticipated to break ground in the spring of '24 and be completed for the 26-27 school year. Old Mill North will utilize that same prototype design as Old Mill South. The school is anticipated to hold approximately the same number of students as Old Mill South at 1199, and it will be located at the current Cat North property. Our request is for $11.4 million in local funds to help with the design. The ed specs will be brought before the board in April of '23, and if the funding is approved, we anticipate the opening of that school in the 27-28 school year. Old Mill High School. This high school will utilize that same prototype design that we are currently using at the Old Mill West property, as well as Crofton High School. The school is anticipated to hold about 2,000 students and will be located on the current Old Mill property. Our request is for 12.7 in local funds, and just like Old Mill North, ed specs will be brought before the board in April of '23. The funding request will help start the design process, and we anticipate this school to open in the 28-29 school year. The next slide shows reoccurring projects. Our request is approximately $62.1 million. Many of these projects originate from the comprehensive maintenance plan, which will be brought before you at the next board meeting. The majority of these categories are locally funded, except for building systemics and the aging schools program, which have state contributions. I'll briefly run through some of these. Health and safety is $1.2 million request, which includes projects such as fire alarms, public address systems, and other structural items within the school facilities. Security, we're requesting $3 million, and that's for new and replacement cameras, gates, AI phones, as well as security vestibules in our buildings. Systemic renovations is $37 million, and I'll touch on those in the next slide. We have a number of systemic projects this year relative to last year. Maintenance backlog, our $7 million request includes projects such as generators, miscellaneous HVAC projects, ceiling lights, some asphalt and concrete work, as well as replacement of doors and windows. Roof replacements is a $3 million request, and it's prioritized by roof condition, and these projects are locally funded. Some of our roofs come out of the systemic program, while these are locally funded. Relocatable classrooms, we're requesting $1.2 million, and these are for moving existing relocatables as well as purchasing new ones, which will be used to deal with capacity issues at some of our schools. Asbestos removal, our $600,000 request includes the removal of asbestos tile flooring, insulation, soffit panels, and doors. Barrier free is $350,000 request, and that is for ADA modifications. That includes random modifications that we do for ADA bathroom accessibility as well as entrances and exits to the building. School bus replacement, we have a $2 million request. This is for cyclical renewal of Board of Education owned buses. Health room modifications is $350,000, and those are prioritized by the county health department. School furniture is $600,000, and that's for the replacement of worn or broken furniture for classrooms due to increased enrollments. Upgrade various schools is $800,000 request, and that's for modifications based on program needs and the age of the facilities. These modifications can include media center walls and small modifications to office space for additional staff. Vehicle replacement, our request is for $500,000, and that's to replace aging dump trucks, box trucks, backhoes, vans, and other members of our maintenance fleet. Aging school program, the request is for $575,000, and this is for a state category grant, which is 100% funded for the construction costs. Examples include elevator upgrades, folding doors replacements, and brick repointing. Playground replacement, priority list is based off of the age of the equipment and the number of structures and the school's need. We currently have a $400,000 request for that. Athletic stadiums is 3.5, and that's to be used for bleachers, track and turf replacements. And if we're fortunate enough to receive state grants, that's also the category that those end up in. And then drives and lots, we have a $1 million request, and that is for expanding school parking lots and making safety changes related to separation of bus and vehicles. The last slide is kind of a run through of our systemic projects. Most of them are on the smaller end. The two larger ones are up at the top. So we have Glen Burnie High School. This is phase 2 of 4 for that high school. It's the windows, the roof, and the building enclosure. And then we have a large systemic project similar to North County High School and Annapolis Middle School that we did for HVAC upgrades.
So I only partially told you the truth. I said there was no surprises. There actually is one that you may be hearing a little bit about. So for those board members that have been here for a while, you remember that for school bus replacements, and this is the replacement of our own buses, we have always asked, it's always been about $800,000, and it's been that number for a decade. So 2 million, the number you saw on this slide just before that. Remember that the State General Assembly passed a law that will forbid us from buying conventional fuel-powered buses. The current cost of a fuel-powered bus today, fossil fuel-powered bus is about $130,000. The cost of an electric bus is in excess of $400,000. And that's just the bus itself. That's before you spend a couple $1 million putting in charging stations, BG&E, heavy ups, et cetera. So that request is $2 million for this upcoming year. It's going to be $3 million or more the year after that, and then for every year for the rest of our life, because we're buying buses that cost 3 times as much, and we're going to have to be putting in all the BG&E electrical work and all. But that's the cost of being environmentally friendly, apparently. So that's really the only material change. Again, as I said, and Dr. Bedell emphasized, everything else is really just a rollover from what you've seen before. And with that, Madam President, we'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you. So I'm just going to go as lights go on. And so, Mr. Silforth, you hit the button first.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. We appreciate that. Just a couple of very quick questions. Athletic stadium, that is that going to be the turf field? Is that Southern?
No, sir. So it could be. Mr. Roof mentioned before that to the extent that we get grants for projects for
Correct.
athletic stadiums, that's where it will go. As you know, all of our high schools today, 12 of the 13, have 2 turf fields. One now only has 1. The field up in North County actually got funded, and so that one's underway.
Right.
Last year we finished Glen Burnie and Arundel, so we're down to just 1. We need the help of everyone to convince our friends in Annapolis to please fund Southern High School's turf field, just like they have helped us fund all of the other ones. And if we get that grant, Mr. Silkworth, that is exactly the line item that will go. We will work, once we get notification of award from the state, we'll work with our county budget office and have the appropriation authority put into that line item right there.
Good, thank you. We'll work on that.
We all need to work on it.
So just, have we noticed any substantive problems or concerns with our ongoing construction based upon a supply chain disruption, which is out there in the real world, it's really, really bad.
Well, it's our real world too.
Right.
The good news is on many of our larger projects, we're able to resequence work, right? We started out thinking we were going to do, A, B, C, and D, but guess what? B didn't get there in time. That's okay. We sort of swing the operation around and we'll work on C while we wait on B to get there. So yes, we absolutely are. We're in constant supply with our constructors and our suppliers. And with that information, we're able to be adaptive. We've not missed a deadline yet. We don't anticipate that occurring neither. So we also think that it's going to abate. I mean, the hard supply chain crunches that we had before seem to be easing up slowly. So we think the prognosis is actually better, not worse, into our future.
Hopefully that will continue. So as I look at some of the pictures, it looks like we're saving dollars in terms of design because we've used the same plan for Crofton, the old mill, and now it looks like we're using that for some of these other projects. So
Yeah.
we're saving some dollars.
That's something we're very proud of. Anne Arundel County has
Absolutely.
always been the lead on using prototype. We actually hosted and gave presentations to the rest of the state of Maryland about the benefits of doing it. And yeah, it absolutely saves us design costs, but it really saves us in two different ways that people don't actually really realize. One, it saves us on the design costs, right? But two, it helps the bidders because they've already ordered that steel package. They actually know, right? So the amount of time and effort they need to put into that is less, and the amount of errors, which is the third thing. Once you've built something, right? You build it once, there may be, a couple oopsies here or there, but you fix those. So by the time you get to the end, not only is it cheaper to build, cheaper to design, but we are constructing a much faster because it's replicated, right? Block copy and repaste.
Great. Thank you. Finally, Park Elementary and Lindale. Lindale is going to be an HVAC. When will Lindale actually begin the construction and how long? And will they need portables?
TBD, and TBD. So,
Okay.
so we're asking for the money to begin to work. It's like North County. It's
Right.
going to be. Lindale's a big building. It's going to be
Couple of years.
easily 2 to 3 years once we dig into it. And then if we create swing space to the extent that we have that opportunity, that means we can make the project progress quicker. If we go without portables, that's going to slow it down. And you recall the way that it operated at North County as well. So,
Absolutely.
so we want to get through the project as quickly as possible. So we'll look to see what we can do with the space.
Right. And Park Elementary, that 4 classrooms. When will that start and finish?
We're hoping that it will start this spring.
Good.
Yeah, so DDs should be coming to you shortly in the next couple months, and then we'll move right into CDs and we'll be ready to bid that this spring.
Thank you
We
so much.
typically turn additions around in 1 year. So
Yeah.
if we can get started on time, it won't be for this upcoming September, but it'll be for the September after that.
Great, thank you. I believe Ms. Corkadell was next.
Thank you, President Tobin. Thank you, Dr. Bedell and Mr. Chiknovich for, as usual, a great presentation. Mine are more oriented towards what's on the list. So as it relates, and that would be for asbestos abatement and barrier-free access. How many do we have remaining on those lists?
For asbestos abatement?
Yeah.
Oh, so basically asbestos wasn't banned until President Reagan was president. Most of our buildings are older than 1983.
Yep.
So we still have that in many of our buildings. We've sort of been making progress, but as Mr. Ruff indicated, we're really down to mostly floor tile insulation that's behind the scenes where people really won't see it, inside of doors where it's encapsulated, or transite, which is the exterior soffits of the building. We're long past where it's sort of on the soft inside piece of the products, but at $600,000 a year, we're going to be at this for
A long time.
long past any of us are doing this.
Gotcha. I suspect 600,000 will maybe buy you a project based on how they typically operate or do. Barrier-free access, is that?
Same thing. So it's two things. One, right, we've got buildings that are antiquated, right? Long predate even the American with Disability Act. But the second piece is, just like all codes, those codes are rewritten about every 3 years. So we're always sort of triaging and chasing. We have a barrier-free committee here that vets and prioritizes the projects. We also get yearly input from our special ed department on students that need accommodations, and from our HR department on employees or adults that need accommodations. So it's really taken into account those details and then tackling as much as the funding will allow. But we'll never end, sort of the ADA because of that continuous code upgrade cycle.
Yeah, I know I got a lot of questions and I answer them fairly well, but just getting a little refresher of where we at and what we're up to. The quick question on school bus replacement. So this was, is there, I thought there was other legislation that may also be forthcoming relevant to school buses. Is there anything else that we can anticipate is in that similar category of environmental?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, unless Ms. Ortiz is, I am not, and she and I keep in contact, so I probably would be.
I wasn't either.
But I mean, they've basically, any bus that is purchased before December of 2024, I'm sorry, can continue on for its 12 years of useful life. It will be illegal for me to put a purchase order in on January 1st of 2025. So,
and that includes on back order too, right? So the ones we've already been funded.
So the law says purchase. So not delivery, because delivery could be 8, 9, 10 months afterwards. So it's really, you can buy one in calendar year 22, 23, or 24. But as of July 1 of 2025, you could not put a purchase order in for a new one. You could not order or buy a new one.
So bottom line is we're okay on the current funding numbers as it relates to the vans and the buses that we adopted on July 1. Correct? Or are we going to possibly
yes and no. You're okay with buying fuel-powered buses still, fossil fuel-powered buses.
Okay.
But you need to start putting in all the charging infrastructure. Your electrical heavy ups and all have to get there ahead of time. Okay. So in FY-24, we're talking about getting the normal $800,000 worth of buses, just like we always do. But we need to begin spending on all of the BG&E upgrades that are going to be required. And then it's going to be in the following year, that $2 million number is going to jump up to $3 million the following year, because that's when we're going to start buying the electric buses instead of the fossil fuel buses.
So, and is the state giving us additional monies to make these upgrades, or is this on the back?
They give us $0. School buses are 100%
Three
local,
times the cost, $0.
Or local purchase. There's no state funding for school buses.
I know. Just I want to make sure, because lastly, I just want to thank you, Mr. Silkworth, for bringing it up. South County is the last remaining, and my understanding is that there's no plans for the county in recs and parks to be placing a turf field anywhere near them anytime soon either, correct?
No, so all of our turf fields have either been, the initial installation has either been 100% state funded sometimes, or it's been state funded with a matching requirement. We've seen both flavors over the years. But really, it is, we need the dog to wag the tail here, right? So we need the state to put in a bond bill, see if they can work it through the General Assembly process. You can begin to pre-file things in November, right? So if we can get some sponsors on our delegation to begin pre-filing things, we always help them. We actually complete all the paperwork, do all the pricing and everything for them. But then our local delegation is going to have to adopt it as part of their local bond campaign. And then it's going to have to make its way up through the gubernatorial and full legislative cycle. And then once that is solidified, and I'm explaining to you the way it's always been, right? So once we get that state piece, then the county will wrap around the back end of it and either put the full appropriation into that stadium line that Mr. Silkworth referenced, or the county, if needed, will come up with the matching money to backfill or fulfill the rest of the grant.
So why would we not put it in this budget right now as we do every other single request for the state? Like, in other words, how am I asking formally with a statement as the board, as a board of education, that this is what I want funding for, when everything else is dependent on the same funding at the same time with the same notification and the same cycle?
Because everything before you right now is part of the public school construction program, which has a limited list of things that are eligible for that. That's the purpose of this entire capital budget. Turf fields are not eligible expenditures. They have no pathway to go through as part of the IAC, which is why we're here, really. I mean, again, it's us beating on the doorsteps of our 15 elected leaders here for the county to get that bond bill put in. That's really the gateway to us moving forward.
I guess, though, if all of these are recurring and locally funded, and I have lists behind all of them, and they are what we intend to do, why would that not be included on that list, albeit the local list? Because I have local lists for every single one of these, and this is not even on the list.
Yeah, I know. I hear you. The reason, every single thing, because everything that's on your list and everything that's on your CMP is the replacement or rejuvenation of an existing thing. The turf field at Southern isn't existing. It's not even there. So all of those projects if you back up a slide, all of those things are the replacement of the existing fire alarm system, the existing doors, the existing roof. I know it's hard to explain to folks, Ms. Corkadell, but really, the only way to get from where we are to where we got to go is to get our delegation to please step up to the plate for Southern High School, get the bond bill, and then the county will do everything that they do. And the reason I'm confident about that is every single time, right? We have 13 high schools. 2 each would be 26, right? The same thing has worked 25 times. We just need it to work one more time. And the one more time is with our General Assembly coming through for us. And then I promise you the county will do the right thing because they have 25 times in the past.
So the relocatable classrooms, none of them are new or additional relocatable classrooms at all.
We have not bought a new classroom. We've not bought a new portable classroom since 2007.
Correct.
They've all been the relocation of existing buildings or rehabilitation of existing portable classrooms.
But that's why I was asking, because my recall when I sat on the planning advisory board and it came to us is the CIP in particular, not our operating budget, but with the county. And I thought I recalled for relocatable classrooms that they were presented to us in January as part of that budget, as well as Broadneck High School's brand new turf fields, which they actually they fundraised for.
So you have 2 answers. So when the state passed the mandatory kindergarten bill,
Mhm.
in 2004, the state basically changed the rules for 3 years essentially, because remember the implementation had to be by the end of 2007.
Mhm.
So that is why you saw that change in that 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007 for portables. Since that time, we've not gone back there again at all.
Okay.
We haven't. And again, with respect to everything else there is really the replacement or rehabilitation of an existing widget. And your entire comprehensive maintenance plan, which is tied to these numbers right here, bring together the history of that item that's being replaced or rejuvenated using these monies. Those two documents work the same. Putting in a brand new turf field from scratch that doesn't exist and is ineligible for conventional public school construction program funding. That's the hard nugget to swallow here.
Yes.
It is not an eligible item through anything that we're talking about with the IEC. It doesn't even exist to them.
Okay.
Once you get the thing installed through a grant, through a bond bill, once you get it installed, it now exists. 8 years later, when it comes time to replace it, to, take up the old carpet, put it down, then it's eligible for this list because now it's the replacement or rejuvenation of an existing thing.
I guess because a lot of people look at that and they say, oh, we're renovating what we have, and
Yep.
we've got a group of students that have nothing, because every single high school has the same amount of players on their varsity team, the same amount of players on their junior varsity team. So in other words, capacity and how many students exist in that high school really do not play the quantitative role that other aspects or county turf fields. There's a quantitative factor in population that normally plays out.
Sorry,
But
Dr.
I'm
Bedell,
wondering,
could
yeah.
I let Dr. Bedell add something he wanted to add to this?
Yeah, I was just going to ask though, just one more question?
Oh, sure. Okay.
Along those lines. So a resolution by the board expressing that, yes, we have an interest in pursuing this and we would like that. Is that in addition to those conversations that we have and stuff, is that helpful in any way, shape or form?
It's under your purview. If that is a priority
To
of the board,
deliberate.
it's certainly letting the state officials know that. And if you and Mr. Burns, the president, right, the body of whole, and your attorney feels that that's appropriate, it certainly can't hurt. I
That's
think
what I'm
actually it would be, I personally believe it probably could be helpful.
Yeah.
But ultimately that's up to you and your colleagues.
Yeah, because a letter to the delegation chair, and as well as the county elected officials, because I got to say, I know I trust the system and I trust the process, but it is naturally occurring that people get a little antsy when they don't see anything on a list and everybody's talking about it, but it's not like sitting tangible in writing. But thank you very much, and I will yield.
Yeah, Ms. Corkadell, we met with several of your community members a few weeks ago, and I did bring that back to our team about the field. There is no opposition from any of us in here on our staff around Southern getting a second turf field. We all agree that needs to happen, but just like every other school, the way that the process, that's what I'll murder your
Alex.
last name,
Yeah.
Jesus. Alex articulated, like if we have to get some help from the elected officials out there and I don't think that there would be significant pushback from other folks if, you folks are working the chambers and letting them know, hey, we're the only area right now that doesn't have two. So for me, I think we will do all of the paperwork just like we did for all of these other schools that have two. So I'm on board. Let's make it happen. Let's have a conversation with the folks that represent your area, and let's get moving on it, because I don't think that it will be hard to get this done at all.
I concur, and I know that they're ready to meet. They just need to know what next steps were,
All
because
right.
a lot of this is it gets a little confusing in my recall because it's been such a long time in that regard.
Delegate Howard and Senator Elfrith are
Correct.
probably the first two that you need to work in.
Yes, and District 33, I know, is also part of that, but usually District 30 plays the point, and I know that the senator and the delegate are both anxious to have this happen, and on multiple fronts. So.
I've already had a couple of conversations to that.
But we're not here to discuss merit. But it is helpful to get that information out of how the process works, because even after all these years, I still stumble on his name after, and I've been working with him on budget stuff for going on 16, 17, this will be our 17th year budget together. We sat in different seats at the time, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Frank.
Yes, thank you. Really quick, I had a question about the West County Elementary School, and I think I've seen this somewhere before, but just to recap, when we have a 598-seat school being built, when this opens, what is the projected enrollment? Do you know offhand?
It's whatever your redistricting answer is
Okay.
going to be. We're building it to hold 596. You're going to have to take an action to create a school attendance zone. And we know how many youngsters will live in that zone today, and we can project that forward. That's part of the redistricting process. Our goal is basically to try to have the school, an elementary school, at least 90% occupied. That would leave a little bit of room for growth on top of that, or program. But that should be really your target level as a floor as you're going through your redistricting process.
Let me phrase the question in a slightly different way. If we wanted to get the current elementary school, that's, I think it's 147%, something in that realm, down to approximately the low 90s, where it would just be at the cutoff range. How many students plus projected growth would you have in a new school just with those students and the additional projected growth?
So you probably have about 500 kids
500.
that immediately should and could come out of Piney Orchard.
Okay.
So Piney Orchard, you take 500 kids out of it, Piney Orchard becomes a 700 to 800 kid school, not a 11 to 1200 kid school, right? And we mostly talk about the Two Rivers community, Ms. Frank, but there are other neighborhoods that will be much closer to this school than Piney Orchard as well. So it's not just the new construction, but it should also be a look at the existing neighborhoods that are along Conway in that area of the new West County School.
Okay, thank you. That answers it more what I was trying to pull out of you. The next question, just really briefly, I saw one here, obviously I'm going to ask about Northeast Middle School's HVAC gymnasium. Can you just give a quick recap on what that would be?
Sure. The funding to do the design work for that school, as well as Chesapeake Bay Middle School, just got approved this July. This board just approved a contract for the engineering and architecture work required to do that. The designers have a purchase order has now been issued. They're underway doing that design work. When that design work is done, they'll turn it into the county government for regulatory review and permits. When it pops out of that, we'll be able to go bid it. We'll come back to you, hopefully with a successful vendor, contractor. And if the board votes on it, we'll be able to begin construction on it. Ideally, if we don't have impediments, either in terms of regulatory review or supply chain issues or whatever, we would love to be able to get that air conditioning up in time for next school year. September would kind of be the ideal. If we encounter, other issues, then it would probably be after we hit and switch over to heating season. So it will be the next time we fall back into cooling, which will be, sort of like that April timeframe after that.
Okay, yeah. I might have a couple more questions that I'll email you on that one too. Thank you so much.
Okay, I don't see additional lights. I have a couple of, I hope, very brief really only, brief questions. So again, on this last slide, looking at the playground equipment improvements, I looked at the maintenance plan. I may have missed it. I couldn't see which playgrounds we were going to be looking at.
In 24,
Yes,
so it's in there,
I'm
but
sure it's in there.
not
I must have
easy,
missed it
so
in my,
I'll let you know. So,
if you just, yeah.
yep, so the 24 projects,
Mhm.
for, if you want to jot it down, I'll give you an answer, but it starts on page 24 and then ends on 27.
Okay,
But specifically, it would be so FY-24 would be Bodkin Elementary School, Brooklyn Park Elementary School, and Van Buckland Elementary School.
okay. And I'm assuming you have a process similar to the other processes you've outlined with regard to prioritizing playground.
Yeah, so
Updates.
actually the answer is yes. We actually have certified playground inspectors. We have to send them to school and they get accredited to do that. So we do annual playground inspections, and they're inspected for safety. They're inspected for ADA accessibility, and they're inspected for appropriateness. And by that, I mean grade level
Okay.
appropriateness. So we take those factors into account. The last factor is really the size of the school. So it's
Mhm.
really safety first, always, ADA accessibility second, usability third, and then sort of the population served fourth. So those are the algorithms, but it all hinges to begin with. Now, the sad thing is really the cost. I mean, you would think that $400,000 sounds like a lot of money, and it is if maybe you're buying something for your backyard, or maybe my kids way back in the day. But playground sets nowadays easily, they're about $160,000, $165,000 a copy. So you're really only getting about 3 schools for $400,000.
And the life of a playground is about what?
Easily 30. I mean, if assuming that it's maintained well and stays in code compliance, I mean, it can make 30 years. We certainly,
Okay.
we have ones that are older than 30 years.
Sure.
I'll say they don't build them the same way as they used to
Right.
back in the day, but it can very well. It's a very good long-time investment as long as it's not vandalized, as long as it's not
Right.
damaged or anything else.
So the 160K can be a fairly decent.
And then we're always, I mean, as we do new construction projects, as we're renovating schools, right? So those are getting sort of picked off the list in a different way.
Is it your sense that we're in a pretty good place in terms of being caught up with playgrounds, or is it?
Oh man, we're not in a good place in being caught up with anything. But that's been our history here, right? So we get kind of what we get, and then we
Right.
tackle what we can, and we prioritize and triage
Mhm.
things. But there's not a category up there that we really shouldn't be, spending. And we'll talk about this, when you meet next in that same document. Our maintenance backlog is about $491 million now.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to see Wednesday night.
Yeah.
So really, we should be investing more. I'll say this county, if you go back to that chart that I told you to really pay attention to, this county really has been investing in replacing or renovating our very old antiquated buildings, because you saw we were the 5th oldest in the whole state.
Yeah.
So money's tight, right? So you can't do everything at once. And we, the county, all of us, have really been prioritizing those very old buildings to sort of stabilize those. What suffers is some of this recurring nature
Right.
work.
One other question, speaking of statistics that are useful to share, could you remind me if you have at your fingertips, and Mr. Shaknovich, it's amazing what you often have at your fingertips, where we are in the list of school districts in the state with regard to our per pupil per capita expenditure. That's a statistic you often put
Sure.
before
So
us.
we are about all in. We're about the 19th lowest funded in the state, all in. But if you take a look at the subcomponents, I think we are 23rd out of 24 with federal funding. I think we're 22 out of 24 with state funding. If it was not for the county funding, we would be far worse than even 19.
Right.
So we're a very fiscally conservative jurisdiction. And because we are viewed, and I referred to this earlier, right? Because both the state and the federal government, the amount of funding they give you is inversely proportionate to your wealth. We are one of the, wealthiest counties in Maryland that works against us for state funding. We are one of the wealthiest states in the United States of America that works against us for federal funding. And therefore, it comes down to local funding only. It's got to save the day. But we live in a county that's got a revenue cap. So there are some constraints on the local amount of funding too. Those three things sort of conspire to kind of put us where we're at in terms of the total picture.
So we have a lot of money. We're the third wealthiest county, I think, and a very wealthy state. And we don't like to spend it, is what you're saying.
I'm saying there's a law in the books that
Yes.
governs that.
Yes. Okay. I'm sorry, Ms. Schalheim.
Oh, no, I just wasn't, I was going to ask what the total backlog amount was, because it is ever striking to me that what we, even though we asked for what seems like a gobs of money, doesn't even remotely come close to scratching the surface of a maintenance backlog. When you don't maintain your buildings, well, then bad things happen, and then you have to spend more money later. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, it's in your, we're going to talk about it Wednesday evening, but on page 22, it's in your packets already.
Yeah.
On page 22 is the total, but it's also disaggregated by category. So you can sort of see where our really big liabilities rest.
Yeah, it's pretty sad. Going back to, we're still on that slide. So driveways and parking lot improvements, and forgive me if it's in the other, and I just didn't see it, but do we have a priority list for facilities?
It's in the comprehensive maintenance
Okay.
plan as well.
I will look that up. Yeah, so that's all I really,
Yeah, the way the CMP is, the way the CMP
Yeah.
is there's a, it's broken out by year. So you can look at 24
Yeah, that's
and
right.
25, and you can sort of look out over time.
yeah. And then when we were talking about playground equipment, I've read once on Facebook, it comes up with that really old picture of like playground equipment from the 1900s, and we were talking about safety. Anyway, yeah. I don't know. It just struck me as funny. Like everything else, I hope that we're fully funded, and we get out of our schools what we put in, and when we put in a little bit relative to what we have, it doesn't serve our children very well. Anyway, thank you so much.
Okay. I do not see any other lights. Did you have anything else, Dr. Bedell, you wanted to offer?
Not for tonight. I have a whole bunch of thoughts, but it's not for tonight.
Mr. Sheknovich, Mr. Ruff, thank you very much. And as always, appreciate all the work that goes into this and answering all of the questions that we had. And we will no doubt see you Wednesday evening. So thank you very much. Have a good night, everyone.